Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach. Today we have with us Dan Barrett, who's the head nerd at AdWords Nerds. Dan, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me, man. I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. So back in the day, it wasn't really a cool thing to be saying, I'm a nerd. So here we are owning, I'm a nerd at AdWords Nerds. So I want to learn all about what you do and how you do it. But get us started with your story. What's your background and how did you get into the industry?
Yeah, I had sort of a winding story, like I think a lot of people do. But originally, the plan was to become a history teacher. So I was working in public schools. I was a paraprofessional. I ran an after-school program. I did my student teaching, and I was, training to be a history teacher. That's what I love. And at some point, I kind of realized I needed to make some extra cash, and so I started freelancing, just doing some online marketing work. When I was in, even middle school, high school, I had been into the internet back in the day where you had to dial up modem into somebody's computer to use the internet. So I had always kind of had a love for tech, and I had started playing in bands when I was in high school, and there was always somebody that needed to make the website or get the t-shirts printed or whatever it was. And so that stuff just always fell to me. So I had this kind of background knowledge, and I was like, hey, I'll start freelancing for local businesses just as a way to make some extra cash. And I realized pretty quickly I was making more money freelancing part-time than I would as a full-time teacher. So I just kind of
I don't know how that could be, because aren't teachers are like 6-7 figure industry, right?
Hugely paid industry.
Right.
Yes, absolutely. The basketball players of the educational space.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, and it is a rough gig, man. And I love it, but it was a rough gig. So, I decided to take a chance. And I started just working with all sorts of businesses. I worked with a pizza place, an ambulance company, all over the place. And I realized pretty quickly that I wanted to be the best at something, right? I wanted to really know a particular niche, and I didn't have one. So I put down $10,000 to go to a Tony Robbins Business Mastery seminar, which was more than I'd ever spent on anything at the time. And, threw it on a credit card, flew to Florida. I sat all the way in the back row, because I didn't want to get picked on. I was like, I don't want anyone to make me do anything goofy. And I ended up sitting next to real estate investors, just kind of striking up a conversation. I was telling them like, hey, I came down here because I want to pick an industry to really focus on. And they were like, hey, you should work with us because we always need leads. And that's what I did. I mean, it was almost about a decade ago. And ever since, I have been very narrowly focused, and that's really made all the difference for us. I mean, it's been a wild ride ever since.
So that's awesome, because I know that any business coach, consultant would tell you, you get rich in the niche, or if you try to be all things to all people, then you're nothing to anybody. So I love that you zeroed it in on a really tight industry. So what is it about real estate investors that they are looking for lead force? Because I think about real estate, like agents, like they need buyers or sellers, but this is real estate investors. So talk a little bit about that industry.
Yeah. So real estate investing, I think a lot of people kind of have a sense of it from, nowadays there are shows on HGTV where, people are flipping homes, right? And that's generally the model of the kind of person that we're looking for, right? So the investor that we would work with is someone who's looking not just for someone who wants to sell a home, but someone who is highly motivated to sell their home, right? So if you imagine like, hey, there's real estate as a market, which is massive. And then within real estate, there's seller leads, which is, a niche within that niche. And then within seller leads, there's motivated sellers, which is an even tighter sort of bullseye, right? And so that's what investors are really looking for. And at the time when we got started, I mean, it seems shocking, but there just wasn't anybody else really doing online marketing for those folks. I mean, it's been an industry that has kind of lagged behind technologically for a while. It isn't the case today, but it was then. So I didn't really have a lot of competition. And the biggest thing that I noticed was I would get on the call with investors and they would say, hey, I'm looking to get online leads. I'm a real estate investor. And I would say, oh yeah, got it. Like, hey, are you doing wholesaling? Are you doing, buy and hold? Are you flipping? Are you doing hold? Like, I just knew the language of the industry because I'd been in there for a little while. And every single time the person on the other end of the conversation would say, oh my God, you're the first person I've talked to who even understands what I do.
Wow.
Right? Because it was weird at the time. It was just a very obscure thing, at least to most people. So that was the single biggest advantage we got early on. I mean, now it's a little bit different. Now, we've done it so many times. I would say we've got so many reps in the gym, so to speak, that there's this kind of deep sense of pattern recognition that ends up emerging. It's like, hey, I've been in this situation before. What I'm seeing over here rhymes with this thing we saw over in this other place. And it ends up making us a lot more effective in this way that's a little bit hard to pin down, but I think is pretty profound. So it was a really important decision to focus on.
I couldn't agree more. And it also, like you were saying, you hear like you just learn the lingo and just like subconsciously or actually consciously, the people are like, yes, you get me. And that helps you then to really start getting creative to see, oh, well, if online digital marketing for this other industry works this way, now let me craft it for my real estate investors who need these types of leads. So talk a little bit about what you do. So now here comes what's a typical client relationship where you are working with a real estate investor, they need leads. What are the type of leads that they're looking for? Is it the buy and hold? Is it the fix and flip? What are you typically hearing that they need that you're delivering for them?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the industry has evolved quite a bit over the last 10 years. Maybe kicking and screaming a bit along the way, but it's been happening. I think when we started, the primary model was flipping, right? Which is, hey, you're going to sell a house. Maybe you got to move. Maybe it's a house you inherited in the state you don't live in, or it's a house that needs a lot of repairs. You don't have the money to repair it. So it's going to be hard to sell it on the typical real estate market. So you sell to an investor. Let's say you sell it for 75% of what the market value would be, right? But in exchange for that, you get cash. You don't have to do any of the paperwork. You don't even have to move your stuff out. You just walk out of that house, right? So there's a lot of convenience involved.
Yeah.
That investor is then going to spend, let's say they buy it for $100,000. They spend $10,000 fixing it up. They put it on the market and they sell it for $130,000. Bingo, you've made $20K, right? Whatever it is. That was the traditional model. In the last 10 years, there's been a lot of variation on that model. So for example, there is wholesaling, which is, you want to sell your house. I come to you and we put that house under contract and say, okay, I have the right to sell this house for you. And then I take that contract to a list of investors that I know and say, hey, I've locked up this property at this price. I will sell you the contract so that you can buy it. But you're going to pay me $5,000 or $10,000 for a finder's fee.
Got it.
And that way I'm sort of part of this real estate transaction, but I don't have to put any money down or anything like that, right? So that's wholesaling. There's all million different variations in between. Buy and hold would be, hey, we're looking to rent this property out. It's part of a long-term portfolio, something like that. But what all those people end up having in common is they're looking for people that need to sell, that are ready to sell fairly quickly. And what those leads have in common is that, one, they're relatively rare, right? If you think about, hey, everybody that wants to sell a house, the sort of bullseye of people who really want to sell very quickly is actually not super huge, right? That's a relatively small part of the market. And the other thing is that there's a lot of competition for those people, right? That is the ideal sort of client or seller for many different types of businesses. And so it's a highly competitive, highly profitable market, but with not a lot of supply to go around. And so what ends up happening is you've got a situation where efficiencies, like if you are a little bit better at acquiring those leads, you're a little bit better at following up with those leads, you're a little bit better at closing those leads, whatever it is, that can multiply out to tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in extra profit over the course of a year. So it's this really weird market. I always say it's not like any other industry I've ever been in. Even online marketing, it's not like any other kind of lead generation you're ever going to do, but it's high paced, it's fun, and it's incredibly valuable to the client when it goes well. So it's a fun market to be in.
Yeah, and it makes me think too, like you've got to be there right there on at the moment that that is the prime time. You know, like you think about keywords on search. It's like you don't just want someone that's searching for some broad term. You want someone that's searching for a specific item and comparing it to another item and using a keyword like best price for, because then you know that's a buying keyword. Well, you then obviously have dialed in specific proprietary keywords. I don't care to know the list because that's probably a great, selling feature that you have, but that indicates that here's this opportunity. Well, once you then are dialing that in for your client, what then? Because I know from a marketing standpoint, if you have a client that says optimize my AdWords account and the click goes to their website, typically the person's website is a jumbled mess, and now the seller that saw that ad, it clicks on it, goes there and goes, I don't know. So what are you doing to make sure that the engines are firing on all cylinders?
Yeah, I think it's changed a lot over the last even 5 years, which makes this kind of a fun industry to be in. So, on the website side, which you mentioned, which is obviously important, we build out sort of special landing pages for our clients a lot of the time. We're really focused on, hey, we're going to make this as painless as possible. Just give us your information. We're going to get you on the phone, right? That's ultimately the goal for these type of clients. We're trying to get people to sit down in the living room and have a conversation, right? So they want to get them on the call as quickly as possible. There's technology you can use. So let's say you fill out a lead, you come to my website, I've got a form that says name, address, and phone number. That's it, right? Your name, email, phone number, whatever it is. You can set up technology where, you type your phone number into the box, you click submit, and what happens on the back end is the technology calls the client and then calls you, the lead, and then connects you automatically. So you click submit on the lead form to send me your phone number, and then 45 seconds later, that call is connected and you're on the phone with the client, right? So there's a metric that we track called speed to lead, which is how quickly can we get in touch with someone that fills out a lead form. That's really one of the main sort of lead indicators of long-term success. On the backside, though, what's really happening now in the online marketing industry is it's become very much about who has the deeper and more impactful data set, and how do you pass that data back to these lead channels or these advertising networks so that they can dial in your lead flow appropriately. So, for example, literally before we talked, I was on the call with a client, and we were talking about, well, hey, I'm going to come into your Salesforce, CRM setup where they track their leads and deals, and we're going to make sure that every time any one of these leads gets marked as having gone to an appointment or getting put under contract or generating revenue, that information is going to be automatically passed back to Google with a unique identifier. Google is then going to use that unique identifier to go back and find the original click that generated that appointment and contract and revenue. And it's going to then understand, okay, well, what made that click unique? How can I find more clicks like that? And then it's going to use an algorithm to dial in its bids and the ad auction and its targeting. So you're entering this kind of era where what's happening is the larger players, the larger accounts are generating massive amounts of data and then passing that data back to platforms like Google and Facebook so that they can get ever more increasingly efficient with the bids that they spend to generate those clicks. So if you imagine, you go back to the onset of electronic trading in the stock market, right? So the very first time that people started using computers to execute automatic trades on Wall Street, you had this weird era where what ended up happening was, okay, these programs can make thousands of trades in the amount of time that someone on a classic stock trading floor could make one or two, right? So there's a massive economy of scale here. So what ended up happening was people realized, well, the closer I get physically, the closer my computer gets to the stock exchange, I can shave like a fraction of a second off the amount of time it takes for me to execute those trades. And that will give me an advantage in this sort of trading war. And so you would have literally people, there's an era where people are like digging tunnels from properties in New York City to try to get 5 inches closer to the stock market so they could set up their server to execute electronic trades, right? Wow. And it was like tiny advantages multiplied over thousands of transactions a second would create millions and millions of dollars of excess revenue, right? So similarly, what's happening in this era of machine learning and artificial intelligence and these sort of algorithmically driven ad platforms is, hey, if you have a way of really accurately tracking the benefit that a lead gives you to your business, whatever that is, whether that's revenue or, whatever metric you track, if you can get more of that data back to Google in a more efficient way, Google will be able to bid more effectively and target more effectively for you. And that is sort of the equivalent of shaving those seconds off that electronic trade, right? So it's like the more data you generate, the more advantage you have, the more advantage you have, the more leads you get, the more leads you get, the more data you generate, right? And it creates this flywheel effect. So it's a really fascinating time to be doing this. It's fun and it's challenging, but it never stops changing. That's kind of what makes it cool.
And I love that you're so analytical because you lost me at, click, or you lost me, it's like, wow, that goes over most people's heads. But I follow the methodology, the strategy, because you want to know if this, then that. You want to know if they clicked and ultimately ended as a customer client closed deal transaction. Then let's now backtrack and put our rear view mirror on and go, what was it about them that we can now clone and replicate and find better, so that then I'm spending the same amount of money but getting even maybe more leads, or actually less leads but more qualified leads because they're just like the ones that converted. So I love that you've got that focus, and I think that it really becomes like blue ocean, because there's people out there that'll just go, oh, I can get you hundreds of leads, but you're not going to wade through them. They're not going to be good leads. And I think that real estate investors really need to be right there, top of mind, follow up, and have everything dialed in. So I just think that your digital marketing services are just spectacular. If someone is listening to this going, hey, maybe me too, put my hand up, how can they learn more about your packages and reach out and connect with you?
Yeah, so I always say AdWordsNerds.com is the website. You can go there. We've got all sorts of blog posts, articles, stuff like that. I also have a podcast called the REI Marketing Nerds podcast, which you can find anywhere fine podcasts are sold. But I'm on there every week talking to people and talking about this kind of stuff. So either of those would be great.
Excellent. Well, Dan, thank you so much for coming on today. It was a real pleasure having you on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, dude. This was great.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneurssradio.com.